Hi, I'm Paul J. Welcome to theAnalysis-news. Joining me today is Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who needs no introduction, so I'm not going to do any. Thanks for joining me, Larry.
Good to be with you, Paul. It's been a while.
It's been a while. But given what's coming in a few days, I thought we're overdue to have a conversation about these elections and what might be coming. Let me start with this. In 2021, in the Washington Post, 3 brigadier generals said in an opinion piece that the military and I guess Americans should be wary of a possible military coup. They talked about the events that led up to January 6th, and that they actually describe a situation where Trump, or they in the article, they say, or a Trumpian character, because back in 21, they weren't sure whether it would be Trump or someone like Trump, versus Biden, because back then they didn't know it was going to be Harris, but that the election would be essentially won by now Harris, but that the Trump forces would declare they won. Trump would actually declare himself president and create a kind of shadow government, that some state governors would support that, and some of the military would support this shadow government, illegal president, and we would and essentially have 2 centers of power. So this is 3 retired brigadier generals warning this could happen. And we're only days away from the election. Maybe Trump wins, which I suppose takes this scenario out. But if he loses by a hair, do you think this scenario is plausible?
It is plausible. I mean, after all, in our history, we've had 2 such rather dramatic occasions already. We had one that most Americans wouldn't even be able to describe, let alone even name the parties to, maybe other than its leader, Aaron Burr, which we had to put down. An alternative government was going to be formed, and an alternative army and militia were going to be formed, and an alternative country, supposedly west of the Mississippi, was going to be created. It was put down. It was stopped. A more serious one, which led to all of those things, occurred in 1859 and 60. And we had an alternative government declared, and several states went with that government, and we had a bloody war that followed. Could it happen again? Absolutely.
And there's the bankers' coup, 1932-34, Smedley Butler, where some of the major figures on Wall Street approach Smedley Butler, who was the most popular soldier in the country, and proposed he lead the veterans who were having a big protest outside the White House and have a coup against FDR. It fell apart, but a congressional committee that investigated Butler's allegations, because he went right to Congress to report it. Even coup organizers went to Butler wanting him to head it. Instead, he reported it to a congressional committee.
All right.
The congressional committee concluded this was a real thing. They had tried to organize a coup. So yeah, this wouldn't be the first time.
And you also had, during the same president's reign, you had the chief of staff of the Army personally lead machine guns, artillery, and other implements of war over to the Anacostia Flats and threatened to fire on the bonus marchers, the World War I vets who wanted their money. So
the events that led up to January 6th, and I've done this several times in video reports, and if people want to watch it, there's one up there now on the website called Trump's Unholy Alliance, where I trace some of this. But 10 former secretaries of defense declared, essentially warned the military to stay out of the elections. This is January 4th, 2 days before the riot on the Hill. Financial Times on January 4th say, as extraordinary as it seems, a coup is in progress in the United States. So it was pretty well known that they were attempting a military coup. Now it falls apart. It doesn't happen on the 6th. But nobody wants to talk about what led up to the 6th. They all focus on, the riot, Trump's role. But the Congressional Committee and others, the press, the media, people that followed this, they know the story. Almost nobody talks about the lead up and what was going on in the armed forces, which we know from various people, including people like Mikey Weinstein and others. Christian nationalists in the military has a lot to do with it, led by Flynn, who's one of the leaders of Christian nationalism. How come they're not talking about it? They meaning the Democrats and the press.
I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is credibility, and they have an ease of dismissing it for lack of credibility. That's sort of a cover-up, too. Two, they don't want to face it. They don't want to confront it because they don't know what to do about it. And they just cross their fingers, go to bed at night, get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and pray that it doesn't happen. And pray that America's institutions hold and that everything is okay rather than a disaster. There are probably other reasons too, but I found one of the most favorite techniques of reacting to crisis in America is to put your head in the sand. That's better than what we're doing in Ukraine and Gaza, for example, which is full-blown support of absolute atrocities. But it does save your conscience to a certain extent. You put your head in the ground, you ignore the realities, and again, you hope they go away. We have a very bad habit of doing that at some of the most ethereal levels of responsibility and power in this country. We have a bad habit of doing that. Powell used to talk about it all the time. People would rather look out the window and see the marketplace and go buy something, as it were, than they would face a crisis, or even worse, try to avert a crisis, because you are always operating on the principle that if you do avert it, no one will believe you that it was coming. You may suffer from that, from the decisions you make to try and avert it.
There was a report in the press a few months ago that there were 4 working groups working for the Congressional Committee investigating the events of January 6th, but only one working group's report was published, the one that focused on Trump and his role. And that the people that ran the other 3 working groups leaked to the press, furious that their work wasn't made public. I'm assuming one of those working groups must have been what was going on in the military. Is one of the reasons they don't want this to come out is they don't want people to know how dangerous the situation is in the military, the strength of Christian nationalism there. And they don't want the U.S. to look like a banana republic, quote unquote, that it would, be bad for business for American to look in such disarray.
And I would suggest to you strongly that the military joined in that suppression effort, if it was one. They didn't want to look bad either.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes them look in jeopardy, which it seems like they may well be. If these 3 retired generals are right, then it's a lot more precarious in the military.
No general, certainly no chairman of the Joint Chiefs or chief of service wants to admit that on his watch that sort of thing could happen.
But the Democrats, their economic policies help create the conditions for Trump, of the amount of inequality that developed. And they can boast about a great economy, but with inflation down and prices still high, and they're not explaining why that's taking place. And, it can have the odd reference to price gouging, and now they're not even talking about that.
For a long time, Paul, you know this, we've been reporting governmentally reporting through agencies and bureaus responsible for data and statistics, and through the White House itself, that the economy is good based on the top 0.01%. That's who the economy is good for. We don't care about the rest of America. We say we do, but we really don't. We've destroyed the lower 50%. Now we're working on the upper 50% minus about 2%. And it's that 2% that we are making richer and richer and richer and richer at the expense of the other almost 90+%. And that's the way that's the way neoliberal economics works, Paul. I mean, you know that.
Yeah. The other thing I think that isn't getting talked about at all, really, is why 75, 80 million people are likely to vote for Trump.
Yeah.
The guy, at least in his rhetoric, sounds and talks deranged. He sounds like a lunatic.
Puerto Rico is a garbage dump in a town that has 90,000 plus Puerto Ricans. How smart is that?
And Trump had to be listening to that. He's sitting backstage, and you gotta, maybe not, it's possible, but you think he must have been listening to it, or somebody must have said it to him. Do you know what that guy just said?
Yeah,
people
laughing his ass off.
Well, probably, but for people who don't know what we're talking about, although most people probably do, this supposed comic comes up to begin the rally in Madison Square Gardens, and one of his jokes is there's a pile of garbage in the middle of the ocean, and it's called Puerto Rico. And you're right. He says that in New York, where there's, I guess, more Puerto Ricans than anywhere outside Puerto Rico. And then they're worried about Pennsylvania, where's the next place there's the most Puerto Ricans.
Yeah.
But the point is, Trump gets up and doesn't disassociate himself from that joke at all. And they know Madison Square Gardens is the place in 1939 where the American Nazis held a rally with a big picture of George Washington on the wall, saying Sieg Heil.
Yep.
And they know they're evoking that memory. So they're kind of deliberately crossing a line.
I was in New York at the time, and back up just a little bit, I was in one of the most established restaurants in New York City. Been there so long that it had a picture on the wall of their 1897 menu. This guy was the owner, and his dad before him was an establishment in Tudor City, New York. And they had one metaphor for Trump and what was happening down at Madison Square Gardens. And it was that it was Trump's last visit to the city to extend the middle finger to New York. That's what it was. That's the way they all looked at it. There wasn't a disagreeing nod in the entire restaurant. There were 200 people plus in that restaurant.
So my question was, if 75, 80 million people are going to vote for this lunacy, what does that tell you about the state of American society?
Nothing that we don't know about it. It's deteriorating rapidly. It's falling apart. The whole society is collapsing. Part of it's these external wars that no one understands. And how can you justify billions and billions of dollars going to the Levant, to the Middle East, to support a genocidal maniac named Netanyahu, to kill not 40,000 like they say, but close to 200,000 now, men, women, and children? How can you do that? And you've got people in North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, South Carolina, and Georgia who don't have a house, who don't have a prospect for the next day. And you're sending all that money over there, and you're sending, in comparison, a pittance down to help these people in those regions. This is really confusing to most Americans, particularly those who watched their house float away on a swollen river about a week or two ago. It's incredibly destabilizing of the country. It's almost as destabilizing. In fact, in some respects, I think more destabilizing than slavery was, which, as I said, going back to 1859, 1860 is when we really fell apart and started fighting with one another.
The firebombing of Germany, the firebombing of Japan, the nuclear bombing of Japan, as atrocious as all that was, and it was, and in my opinion, war crimes, at least you can understand the American public opinion that supported all of that. At least there was a war going on. People, Pearl Harbor had been bombed. You can understand why people accepted it. Palestinians are not threatening the United States, and
Nope.
This is not a war against Americans, that somehow these atrocities. But still, the American media, which for some time actually was outraged, in a way I hadn't seen them for a while. Like even CNN was doing some legitimate reporting on how devastated Gaza was. Now it's all normalized. It's barely talked about anymore.
Yep. The Israelis in their propaganda campaign, AIPAC, others, have been very successful in pitching the story that they want the American people to believe, and the American people are, in most respects, gullible enough to believe it. Look at the attack that just happened. Israel was thoroughly thwarted in a 100-plane strike with at least a minimum of 2 standoff missiles on each plane. Maybe a dozen and a half hit. Maybe they killed a few people. I'm hearing it's under a dozen. They didn't do a whole lot of material damage. I just watched a London TV special showing all the damage, and I laughed with the guy doing his little show on TV with showing the damage. He didn't even show any damage, but he said it was damage. And then he switched to the next one. I like CNN, with the big political things up there. Oh, look at that. They hit that. Oh, look at that. They hit that. I've got reports from on the ground in Tehran. Citizens were out in the streets with their cell phones filming the missiles coming in and being struck by the Russian-directed anti-aircraft missiles that brought them down in hordes. Most things that hit were destroyed Israeli missiles. Why is Iran not now just fuming mad and going to strike right back? Well, they may, because they want to finish Israel off, and they could well do that. But it's tempered right now, and it's tempered principally because not only did Israel, wisely enough, I think under great pressure from us, select only military targets to hit, they missed most of them. And the whole region knows this. The whole region knows Jordan refused them overflight privileges. Jordan said they'd come up and shoot them down if they flew over Jordan. The whole region knows that Saudi Arabia was playing with the idea of telling everyone to do that, and came very close to getting everyone to do that. The tides are turning against Israel. The whole region knows how many casualties they're taking in Lebanon. The whole region knows that Hezbollah is sincere in warning 70,000 Jewish citizens, personally warning them. If you go back to your places, we will kill you. They're not going back to their homes. They're going to go to Tel Aviv and get on an airplane, and they're going to evacuate Israel. A million, Paul, have already left Israel, probably permanently. More are going to leave. This is really bad for the state of Israel, and Netanyahu is still clinging to his principles, such as they are, still clinging to his strategy. I listened to the woman who just stepped down at the State Department, the first high-ranking Foreign Service officer to step down. She was on Democracy Now! Today. Powerful voice, very powerful voice. And she as much as called her boss, Tony Blinken, a liar. She's briefed him multiple times on what's happening, and he keeps telling her, go away. Don't bother me. And right before she retired, he essentially censured her. And censored her. And so she stepped down. Very articulate woman, and she knows what she's talking about. She knows how many times we violated the law, what laws we violated, how many times he lied to Congress, telling them we hadn't violated the law. Of course, the subservient Congress wants him to lie. Many of them anyway, not all of them. The thing is, being Israel's lawyer, as Blinken has been, Netanyahu's lawyer, is not working. It's not working, and he can say all he wants to say about there's going to be a ceasefire and there's going to be a peace, and stand on television and say as he did, they've met all their objectives. They've defeated Hamas. They've quelled Hezbollah. They've taken care of Iran now. And now, so we can probably have peace now. In other words, now everyone listen to me and let's have a ceasefire and a peace agreement, because then Israel can move in and settle in Gaza. Because that's what they want to do, of course. But they can't do that. Ben-Gvir has been kicked out of northern Gaza. His settlers have been kicked out of northern Gaza. Who have they been kicked out by? A few Hamas, but mostly by the IDF, telling them to get out of the way because they're still fighting Hamas in northern Gaza. It's a disaster, Paul.
As I was saying, CNN and MSNBC and some of the mainstream news, I thought for a while was really covering Gaza in a better way than I expected about the savagery of the Israeli attack against the Palestinian people. You often heard how there should be a distinguishing between Palestinian civilians and Hamas fighters, and there wasn't. They were killing civilians. But as the election heated up, as we got closer to the vote, they stopped doing this.
That's part of the reason.
Because they'd wind up having to critique Biden,
right?
And they didn't want to, so they started shutting up about it.
But part of the reason too, and I've had a couple of guys I admire and respect tell me this. One U.S. reporter, one Brit reporter. Their lives are in jeopardy. They're being shot at too, and if they say anything adverse, the shots are more accurate.
This meaning IDF shooting journalists.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, which there's pretty good evidence they've been deliberately assassinating journalists.
Yep.
So the vote's on the 4th. So I produced this video, which was mostly critiquing Peter Thiel and the people around Trump. I made it pretty clear that in the final analysis, the problem is the billionaires and the inequality, which has been under both parties, and the hollowing out of the economy and the stagnation of workers' wages, especially in the suburbs and rural America, happened under both parties.
Yes.
But certainly the preponderance of the video was a critique of the far-right religious, I didn't use the word fascist, but now everybody's using it, and it is more or less what they are, the Opus Dei on the Catholic side.
I actually saw a sign in New York that says Jesus was a fascist. You can't beat that.
No, you can't. There's a quote from Hitler, which I think is so appropriate. Apparently Hitler said, "I use emotion to talk to the masses, and I reserve reason for the few." And I think the evangelical Christianity is for the masses, and this far-right Catholic cabal, which includes J.D. Vance, most of the Supreme Court, many of the leading members of Congress and Senate, including not only in the Republican Party, although mostly, there is a real fascist cabal that works together with evangelical Christian nationalists.
Yes.
And that, so I some people have critiqued the video. Why are you only focusing on the Trumpists? You're not critiquing the Democrats enough. And so my answer's been, listen, I've been critiquing the Democrats every time I open my mouth for the last, since I've been doing anything on camera.
That doesn't work because no one has any memory.
But yeah, I do think that in order to organize against the billionaires and against this imperialist policies, you do need to defeat Trump to have the room to keep organizing. And so I've been saying, without creating illusions about who the Democrats are and what this system is, yeah, the Trumpists do need to get defeated. I don't know, what is your take on that?
No, that's a fine argument in my view, a very sophisticated argument, and I think the right argument. Unfortunately, most Americans aren't that way. So I don't blame the people who are going whole hog for Kamala and for the Democrats, because that's the nature of the American political system. You have to do that to persuade enough votes to vote for you. What I want to see, the proof for me is going to be if they change their policies afterwards, even slightly. Political space is opening now. You can see it. The polls are showing it. There's opposition to the war in Ukraine, and there's significant opposition to the war in Gaza. So if she does get elected and is given that political space to change policies, I'm all for her. And if she isn't, like you said, she's not Trump. I'll be glad to go out on the street and campaign against her for 4 years. I don't think I'll go out on the street with Trump. I think I'll be in a prison cell. And here's something I heard in New York too, from some old timers. I hadn't given this a lot of thought. I should have probably. Your emphasis on this gentleman should have made me do this. They're counting on Trump dying in office. Their hero is J.D. Vance. Right. That's who they want in there. That's who Peter Thiel and others like him want in there to be the president or the dictator for life.
I think this is so important that one, they do want, well, Mark Cuban put it pretty well. I have the clip in the video. They want essentially to turn the United States into a corporation. Everybody can buy shares. And of course, the billionaires will buy more shares than anybody else. They'll appoint a CEO called the president. And unless the president gets impeached, essentially the board, who is made up of the billionaires, that president, there aren't any more elections. And this is exactly what Trump actually said. There's a quote in the video, we have it, where he says, "My dear Christians, I'm a Christian. I love you, my Christians. Vote for me this time, and you won't have to do it after 4 years." Yeah. They appear not to be joking about this.
I think we had a similar effort, less sophisticated and based on other issues, principally on cornering the gold market, with Grant in his second term. And Grant and his Secretary of the Treasury all by themselves. This has only been discovered by historians in a wide way, or a wider way, in the last 20 years, really saved the country because there was a circuit of billionaires at that time, and that was really something then, who were moving to and had achieved almost the percentage necessary to corner the gold market, as it were, and then demand whatever it was that they wanted, which was a dictatorship. And Grant stopped it. And he and his Secretary of the Treasury were on tenterhooks for about 24 straight hours because they didn't know if the move they, as the federal government, had made would really be sufficient to defeat this. And it was. And there was great relief in the White House, as you might imagine. But they never shared it. They were the only two who knew about it.
So what do you think is I guess there isn't one argument, but if you exclude people who are, very religious and see Trump as a sort of vehicle for God's work, and whether it's evangelical or sort of right Catholic, but sincerely believe that this is God's work, if you exclude those people, there's a lot of the pro-Trump vote, which in fact many even voted for Obama in the past, and now voting Trump. What is the arguments that are getting through to them? Given that many of them actually voted for Obama, so it's not a clear-cut racist vote, it's not a clear-cut religious vote. Yet something in the Trumpian, gestalt or whatever, is appealing to them.
I think it's a combination of things, but I think the major thing I sensed in New York, for example, I sensed in Houston, other places where I've been recently, and that is just a dissatisfaction with the whole direction of the country. And they look at the Democrats as being responsible for that direction. Whether that's right or wrong is immaterial. That's who they look at as being responsible for it. Most of them, anyway. Those that are going to vote for Trump or possibly will vote for Trump. And they think any change is better than no change. And so they're going to cast their ballot for the other party. They don't pay any attention to the things like you're talking about, the things like I talk about. It's water off a duck's back to them. All they know is change, a different political party.
Yeah, I back in 2016, we interviewed a guy in a diner outside of Baltimore. And I said to him, we said to him, Trump's, many people think he's half a lunatic. He lies all the time. And the guy cuts in, he says, I know he's a liar. I know he's a maniac. I know he's only out for himself. What does that tell you about what I think about the other guys?
That's a great comment. Great comment.
Okay, just to wrap up. In Michigan, which is one of the key swing states, is Dearborn, and one of the largest or the largest Arab population, pro-Palestinian population in the United States, many of whom are so furious at Harris for not taking some kind of a stand that somehow distinguishes herself from Biden's completely one-sided support for the Israeli atrocities, and who are planning either not to vote or vote a third party, and are just so angry at how Harris has handled this that they just will not vote against Trump, and meaning for Harris. What do you say to them?
I think that's a real weakness for the Democrats right now. I think that plus a lot of people like me are not going to vote. They're not even going to go to the polls and vote. And that's something for me to do because I've been voting for 60 plus years. But I'm pretty sure right now I'm not going to the polls. I haven't been so far, and I usually vote early. They're just not going to vote. There's another...
hang on. Well, why wouldn't you, if you agree that Trump is such a danger, in spite of all the critique of Harris, which I certainly agree with?
Well, part of it has to do with where I'm located and how my vote will be counted, and this will go overwhelmingly.
I'm the same as you. While right now I'm living in Canada, I'm a dual citizen.
Yeah.
But the last place I lived was Maryland, and I'd have to vote in Maryland, and it wouldn't make any damn difference.
Yeah.
So
Mine would not.
I can't get inspired either.
Yeah. The other,
but if I was in a swing state, I would.
Yeah, I probably would too, because I'd hold my nose and go vote and pray. At the same time,
what do you say to people in Dearborn, Palestinians, people of Arab origin?
Well, the optimist in me says, hold your nose and vote for the Democrats and hope for the best. And if it doesn't happen, then let's clean house. And I mean it. I mean, let's clean house. Let's clean the congressional house out. Let's clean the White House out next time. Let's insist. Start right away insisting on a different election process. Kill this primary crap. Let's go back to, in a big tent, but let's all of us be in the big tent in some way, our representatives or whatever, in order to pick the candidates. We can't go on having election after election, no choice. We've got to go back to Mr. Smith comes to Washington in some way or another. We've got to figure out a way to do that. Now, the cynic in me, which is what is real me, the pessimist in me, which is what is real me, is this country's finished. And it doesn't really matter who you vote for because the end is upon us.
Now you're sounding pretty apocalyptic.
Yeah, I'm looking at the lack of nuclear weapons treaties. I'm looking at what we're doing with our MIRV warheads. I'm looking at what the Russians and Chinese are doing because we're doing what we're doing. We're in a new nuclear arms race. Not a word has been said about that from the White House. We are headed towards Armageddon as sure as Armageddon is waiting out there for us. And we're going to be the initiators of it. We used them, we invented them, and we used them first in 1945, and we will lose them last in 2026, whenever it is, and it'll be over. That's the cynic in me. And it's so inexorable, this march towards the end of empire. And we're the only empire in human history. Check it out. 5,000 years that we know about of human history, the only empire that ever invented the technological means to destroy the world.
Well, I decided many of my friends are depressed, concerned, anxious, and I've decided I'm a clinical optimist, which is completely irrational. I'm a clinical optimist. But I do believe if we have any chance of organizing and changing things in the U.S. to some extent, and I agree with Dan Ellsberg about this, you got to start with defeating the Trumpist forces, and then you got to really rally people against the kind of forces the Democrats represent, the leaders of the Democratic Party, which means, it means electing it has to be primaries right now because that's all there is, but you can win primaries if people get organized against this.
In New York, I was on a panel, and Judge Napolitano was the moderator. And he asked me a question, or maybe it was Scott Ritter, I can't remember. One of them asked me the question. We went to the whole panel, and fortunately for me, I got the last bite at the apple. And the question was, you're in the elevator with the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, a very powerful man. Panel was on nuclear weapons. What are you going to say to him? Let me change the venue a little bit. I'm down in his hidey hole in the Senate, where they tend to be a little more honest. And he's pulled out a bottle of Maker's Mark, and we both have a shot. And I say, Jack, let me tell you something. You have two choices. You can go down in American history as being the asshole who did absolutely nothing about the fact we're headed to nuclear Armageddon, or you can be a hero in the books of the Senate. Profiles of Courage will do an addendum to put you in there. If you demand, you're a powerful man, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. From Sam Nunn's position here, he did all manner of things. You can demand a beginning of a multilateral treaty regime with all of the nuclear weapon states, every single one of them, including that bastard state at the eastern end of the Mediterranean called Israel. Every country has to be in this regime, and every country has to sign up to this treaty when you lead the effort to negotiate it. You can be a hero. You got a choice, Jack. You want to be dead or you want to be a hero? And then I'd leave. That's what I said.
All right. I'm going to, once this vote's over, whoever wins, we'll organize a little group that when he's anywhere near the elevator, we're going to push him in, push you in, and let the doors close.
Somebody's got to do it.
All right, Larry, thanks very much for joining us.
Take care, Paul.
And thank you for joining us on theAnalysis.news. And don't forget the donate button, because if you don't donate, we can't do this. And we're getting close to the end of the year. And we need some donations. We just made these videos. They cost a lot of money.
Take care, Paul.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us on theAnalysis.news.